I wore my grandmother's diamond ring to lunch that Tuesday afternoon, the same ring my mother had spent 20 years trying to claim as her own. When her palm connected with my face in the Bella Vista parking lot, hard enough that my sunglasses flew off and skittered under a BMW, she hissed 3 words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That's my inheritance. But the was already recording. The cameras overhead were already watching. And I wasn't the scared daughter she remembered anymore. I was a woman who'd finally learned that some battles aren't won by being quiet. They're won by having receipts. If you've ever had a parent treat your success like their personal checking account, stay with me. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and this is the story of how I went from being my mother's retirement plan to being free. 10 years earlier, I stood in the driveway of our Magnolia Street house in Asheville, North Carolina, loading boxes into a borrowed pickup truck. My mother watched from the porch, arms crossed, face set in that expression I knew too well. Disappointment wrapped in martyrdom, seasoned with just enough tears to make me feel guilty for existing. "You're really going through with this?" It wasn't a question. Patricia Martinez didn't ask questions. She made statements designed to erode your certainty until you questioned yourself instead. "Chapel Hill isn't that far," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can visit on weekends." My younger brother Tyler emerged from the house carrying my desk lamp, his face carefully neutral. He'd learned early, same as me, that taking sides meant becoming a target. Better to be invisible, to fade into the wallpaper of our carefully curated life where everything looked perfect from the outside. Our house was the kind that made neighbors sigh with envy. White columns, black shutters, seasonal wreaths that my mother changed with religious precision. Inside, she'd decorated with the aesthetic of someone performing wealth rather than living it. Everything matched. Everything coordinated. Nothing was ever out of place, including her children. Patricia worked as an administrative assistant at a dental office, a job she'd held for 15 years while constantly reminding us of her sacrifices. "I could have been so much more," she'd say, usually while looking directly at me. "But I had you kids to think about." My father had left when I was 6 and Tyler was 2. I barely remembered him beyond a vague impression of laughter and the smell of coffee. My mother had systematically erased him from our lives, removing photos, refusing to speak his name, creating a narrative where she was the perpetual victim of his abandonment and we were the anchors that had drowned her dreams. The scholarship letter from UNC Chapel Hill had arrived in March, full ride for graphic design. I'd hidden it for 2 days before showing her, knowing what was coming but hoping, somehow, that this time would be different. That she might actually be proud. "How generous of them," she'd said, barely glancing at the letter. "I suppose you think this makes you special. Meanwhile, I'll be here alone, working myself to death to keep this house running. But don't worry about me. I'm just your mother." Tyler caught my eye as he set the lamp in the truck bed. His expression said everything his mouth couldn't. "Get out while you can." I wanted to take him with me, but he was only 16, still trapped in the performance of our mother's perfect family. Patricia descended the porch steps, each footfall deliberate. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", but she'd mastered the art of taking up enormous space through sheer force of emotional manipulation. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out an envelope. "For expenses," she said, pressing it into my hand. "Since you're so determined to abandon your family, the least I can do is make sure you don't starve." Inside was $200 in 20s. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt the weight of future debt being calculated, interest accruing on affection I'd never asked for. "Thank you," I managed, because refusing would cost more than accepting. "Call me every Sunday," she said. 6 o'clock sharp. "I'll be waiting by the phone. Don't make me worry." The 4-hour drive to Chapel Hill felt like crossing into another country. My roommate was a girl named Vanessa Chen from California, who greeted me with genuine enthusiasm and helped carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs without once sighing about the burden. Her ease with affection, with casual kindness that expected nothing in return, was so foreign it made my chest ache. College was supposed to be freedom, and in many ways it was. I threw myself into design work, spending hours in the studio perfecting layouts and learning software. My professors noticed my dedication, though one gently suggested I remember to eat and sleep occasionally. But every Sunday at 6, my phone would ring, and the tether would pull tight again. "How are classes, Jennifer?" My mother's voice, honey sweet with an edge that could cut. "Not that you'd tell me if you were struggling. You never want to worry your poor mother." "Classes are good. I'm working on a branding project." "A branding project? How nice." Meanwhile, I'm eating ramen because the water heater broke and cost $800 to fix. "But you're doing branding projects. I'm so happy for you." The first time I sent money home was October of freshman year. Just $50 from my campus job at the library, meant to help with the water heater she'd mentioned. I thought it would ease the guilt that lined every phone call, the constant reminders of her sacrifice and my selfishness. Instead, it opened a door I would spend the next decade trying to close. By sophomore year, the requests had escalated. "Tyler needs new shoes for basketball." "The car needs an inspection." The property taxes went up and you know how tight money is. Always phrased as information, never direct asks, but the expectation hung in every pause, every sigh, every mention of how hard everything was without me there to help. I picked up more shifts, started freelancing logo designs for local businesses, told myself it was temporary. Just until she got back on her feet. Just until Tyler graduated. Just until things stabilized. Things never stabilized. Vanessa noticed before I did. We were juniors, sitting in our shared apartment living room, when she casually asked how much I was sending home each month. "Maybe 300, I said, not meeting her eyes. "Sometimes more if there's an emergency." "Jen." Her voice was gentle but firm. "That's almost half your income. You're eating pasta every night while working 2 jobs. Does your mom work?" "Of course she works. She's just, things are tight for her." Vanessa didn't push, but I saw the concern in her face. It was the same expression my design professor had worn when I'd fallen asleep during a critique. The look of someone watching a person slowly disappear. The ring came to me the summer before senior year. My father's mother, Grandma Elena, passed away in her sleep at 78. I'd visited her a few times despite my mother's disapproval, drawn to her warmth and the stories she told about my father as a boy. She left me her engagement ring, a stunning Art Deco piece from the 1930s, 2 carats with delicate filigree work that caught light like captured stars. My mother's reaction when I showed her was immediate and ugly. "That should be mine," she said. "I'm the one who raised you. I'm the one who sacrificed. That woman poisoned you against me with her lies about your father, and now she gives you jewelry that's rightfully mine." "Grandma Elena left it to me," I said quietly. "It was her choice. Everything is always someone else's choice, isn't it? Never mind what I deserve. Never mind what I've earned. You'll probably sell it the first chance you get, just like your father sold out his family." I didn't sell it. I kept it in a small velvet box in my dresser drawer, taking it out sometimes just to remember that someone had loved me without conditions, without keeping score, without making me pay for the privilege of being cared for. Graduation came with job offers. 3 different design firms wanted me. 1 in Charlotte, 1 in Raleigh, 1 in Austin, Texas. The Austin offer was the strongest, a position at Momentum Creative Agency with a starting salary of $52,000 a year. It felt like wealth beyond imagination. "Texas," my mother said when I told her. "You're moving to Texas. As far away as possible." "I see how it is. It's an incredible opportunity, Mom. The firm does work with major brands. This could really launch my career." "Your career. Always your career. What about family? What about the people who invested everything in you? But fine. Go. Just remember who was here when you needed help. Remember who sacrificed." I moved to Austin 2 weeks after graduation, driving across 3 states with everything I owned packed into a rental car. The apartment I found was a tiny studio in East Austin, 400 square feet with a window AC unit that rattled like it was planning escape. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My key in the lock. My space that no one could invade with sighs and guilt and carefully calibrated disappointment. Momentum Creative was everything I'd hoped. Fast-paced, creative, full of people who cared about design the way I did. My supervisor, Marcus Huang, was brilliant and demanding but fair, pushing me to refine my skills while actually teaching rather than just criticizing. For the first time since childhood, I felt like I was building something real. The Sunday calls continued. 6 o'clock Central Time now, 8 o'clock in Asheville. My mother had somehow obtained my work number and would call there if I missed our scheduled time, leaving messages with reception about urgent family matters. I learned to sit by my phone at 5:55, anxiety building like a storm front. Texas must be nice, she'd say. All that space. All that freedom. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, the roof is leaking and Tyler's college fund is empty because I had to use it for repairs. But I'm sure you're having a wonderful time. I can help with Tyler's college, I heard myself say, the words automatic now, the script so worn I could recite it in my sleep. Oh, I wouldn't want to burden you. You've made it very clear that your life is more important than family. The transfers resumed. $200 a month for Tyler's community college tuition. $300 for the roof repairs. An extra $500 when the car broke down. Then back to a baseline of $400 monthly, money that vanished from my account every 30th like clockwork, feeding a need that never seemed satisfied. My co-workers started inviting me to happy hours, weekend trips to San Antonio, concerts at Zilker Park. I declined most of them, calculating the cost of a $15 cocktail against the email I knew would come. Mom needs help with the electric bill. The cat needs surgery. Tyler needs textbooks. Always something. Always justified. Always my responsibility because I was the one who'd escaped. But I was learning something else too, something that would take years to fully understand. I was good at my job. Really good. Clients requested me specifically. My portfolio grew thick with award-winning campaigns. Marcus promoted me twice in 3 years. By age 25, I was making $75,000 a year and sending home nearly $20,000 of it. The math didn't make sense, but I was too deep in the fog to see it clearly. All I knew was that my mother's crises seemed to escalate in direct proportion to my success, as if my accomplishments were personal insults that required immediate financial penance. Then came the call that would begin to crack everything open. Tyler, now 21 and supposedly in his 3rd year of community college, reached out through Facebook Messenger. We hadn't talked directly in months, all our communication filtered through our mother's reports. His message was short. Jen, we need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you come home for Thanksgiving? I booked the flight immediately, some instinct telling me this mattered in ways I couldn't yet name. The diamond ring, which I'd started wearing occasionally on my right hand, sat in its velvet box. I decided to bring it, though I couldn't have explained why. Sometimes the things we carry protect us in ways we don't understand until we need them most. Thanksgiving in Asheville arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that makes the Blue Ridge Mountains look like a postcard. I landed at the regional airport Wednesday evening, rented a compact car, and drove through streets lined with trees dropping leaves in shades of burgundy and gold. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, frozen in time like my mother preferred. Change was an enemy to be controlled, progress a personal affront. The house on Magnolia Street still had its pristine white columns, its perfectly trimmed boxwoods, its wreath on the door now featuring silk turkey feathers and miniature gourds. I sat in the driveway for a full 5 minutes, engine off, gathering the courage to walk through that door. My hand drifted to the ring on my right hand, Grandma Elena's diamond catching the porch light. I'd worn it deliberately, armor disguised as jewelry. Tyler opened the door before I could knock. He'd grown into his height, now a solid 6 feet with our father's dark hair and sharp jawline. But his eyes held something I recognized too well. Exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone carrying weight they were never meant to bear. "She's at book club," he said quietly, pulling me into a quick hug. "We have maybe an hour. We need to talk before she gets back." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and artificial pine, my mother's signature scent combination that she sprayed obsessively to maintain the illusion of effortless domestic perfection. Everything was spotless, coordinated, arranged like a magazine spread. I'd forgotten how suffocating perfection could feel. Tyler led me to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of sweet tea from the pitcher in the fridge, and sat across from me at the breakfast nook. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out his phone. "I need to show you something," he said. "And Jen, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago, but I was scared. I'm still scared, but you deserve to know." He opened his banking app and turned the screen toward me. The balance showed $47.32. Below it, a transaction history that made my stomach clench. Automatic withdrawals to Patricia Martinez. $300 every 2 weeks, like clockwork, going back months. "She told me it was for rent," Tyler said. "That since I was still living at home while going to school, I needed to contribute." "But Jen, I'm not going to school. I dropped out after the first semester. I'd been working full-time at the hardware store on Marymount Avenue for 2 years. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "The tuition money I've been sending," I said slowly. "Where does that go?" "I don't know." Tyler's voice cracked. "But it's not going to any college. I tried to tell you last year, but she monitors everything. My phone, my email, my social media. She has all my passwords. The one time I tried to call you from work, she somehow found out and we had a fight that lasted 3 days. She said I was betraying her, that you'd already abandoned the family and now I was conspiring to turn against her too." He pulled up another screen, a credit report he'd managed to request through his employer's benefits program. 3 credit cards in his name that he'd never opened. Total balance of $18,000. All opened within the past 18 months. "She's doing to you what she did to me," I whispered, the pattern suddenly crystal clear. "How much have you given her total?" "Between the rent and the emergency requests, maybe $20,000 over 2 years. My entire savings from high school. Everything I've made at the store. I can barely afford gas to get to work. I've been eating lunch at Mom's friend Susan's house because she feels sorry for me, but she doesn't know why I'm always broke." The front door opened. We both froze like animals sending predator. My mother's voice rang through the house, bright and performative. "Jennifer, darling, I thought I heard a car. Why didn't you text me you'd landed?" Patricia Martinez swept into the kitchen, all smiles and carefully applied lipstick, arms outstretched for a hug I didn't want to give but couldn't refuse without starting a battle I wasn't yet ready to fight. She smelled of drugstore perfume and the mints she sucked constantly to hide her coffee breath. "Let me look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "Too thin. They're not feeding you properly in Texas. I'll have to fatten you up this weekend." Her gaze dropped to my hand, to the ring, and something flickered across her face. Hunger. Resentment. Calculation. It was gone in a second, replaced by her practiced smile, but I'd seen it. The mask had slipped. "Wearing Elena's ring, I see." She said Elena like the name tasted sour. How appropriate. Flaunting expensive jewelry while your family struggles. "It was left to me," I said evenly. "Grandma Elena wanted me to have it." "Of course she did." Patricia's smile sharpened. "She always did favor you. Never mind that I was the one who actually raised you after her son abandoned his responsibilities. But I suppose blood is thicker than gratitude." Tyler stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing to check his work schedule, and fled the kitchen. My mother watched him go with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times. Satisfaction at having cleared the room, at having me alone where she could work without interference. I've planned the whole weekend, she said, pulling out her phone to show me a color-coded schedule. Tomorrow we're doing Thanksgiving dinner here with Susan and her family. Friday we're going to the outlet mall, they're having incredible sales. Saturday there's a fundraiser luncheon at the country club for the junior league. I told everyone my successful daughter from Texas would be there. You'll wear something nice, won't you? Not those casual tech company clothes. Each item on her schedule was a test, a performance, a chance for her to display her successful daughter while simultaneously reminding me of my obligations. I'd played this role for years, the grateful child returning home to pay homage to the mother who'd sacrificed everything. But Tyler's credit report was burned into my mind. His empty bank account. His admission that he'd been living a lie for 2 years while I funded an education that didn't exist. The money I'd sent, $60,000 over 6 years, had vanished into some black hole of my mother's creation while she bought designer purses and planned country club luncheons. That sounds like a lot, I said carefully. I was actually hoping for a quiet weekend. Maybe just family time. Her face hardened for a split second before smoothing back into its pleasant mask. Family time. How lovely. I'll just cancel all the plans I made, tell everyone my daughter is too important now to be seen with her small-town mother. I'm sure they'll understand. The guilt response was automatic, trained into me over decades. I felt it rising in my chest, the familiar urge to apologize, to accommodate, to make myself smaller so she could feel bigger. But something else rose with it. Anger. Clean and clarifying, burning through the fog of obligation. We'll talk about the schedule tomorrow, I said, standing. I'm exhausted from the flight. I think I'll head to bed early. You just got here. The complaint was immediate, the wound performed with precision. I've been looking forward to this all week and you're already running away to your room. Just like when you were a teenager. Always avoiding your mother. I have a headache, I lied, and escaped upstairs before she could deploy heavier artillery. My childhood bedroom had been converted into a guest room/shrine to my mother's version of my life. Framed photos of me in graduation gowns, carefully curated to show achievements she could claim credit for. My old desk replaced with a decorative table holding potpourri and a stack of Southern Living magazines. Everything that had made the room mine had been erased, painted over with her narrative. Tyler knocked softly an hour later, slipping inside like a spy entering enemy territory. He handed me a folder. I made copies, he whispered. Everything I could find. Bank statements, credit card bills, emails. She keeps files in her closet, in a box labeled tax documents. I waited until she went to bed last night and photographed everything. Inside were months of financial records. My mother's checking account showed regular deposits from me, clearly labeled transfers from Jennifer. But the corresponding expenses told a different story. Spa days. Shopping trips. Restaurant charges from places that definitely weren't struggling family dinners. A payment to a travel agent for a cruise she'd apparently taken last spring while telling me she couldn't afford her blood pressure medication. There was more. Credit card statements showing she'd opened accounts in Tyler's name and maxed them out on furniture, electronics, jewelry. Applications for personal loans using my income as reference, claiming I was helping support her household. She'd forged my signature on documents I'd never seen, used my employment information without permission. This is fraud, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Tyler, this is actual financial fraud. Identity theft. I know. His face was pale. But she's our mother. What are we supposed to do, send her to jail? We sat in silence, both of us wrestling with the same impossible equation. She was our mother. She'd also systematically robbed us while performing the role of sacrificing parent. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I have a friend in Austin, I said slowly. She's a brand strategist, but her sister is a family law attorney. Let me reach out quietly, see what our options are. Don't do anything yet. Don't confront her. Just keep documenting. Tyler nodded, relief washing over his face. Someone else was carrying the burden now, making the decisions he'd been too afraid to make. I hugged him tight, feeling the tremor in his shoulders, recognizing it as the same one that lived in my own body every Sunday at 6 o'clock when my phone rang. Thanksgiving morning arrived with my mother in full performance mode. She'd been cooking since dawn, the kitchen filled with the scent of turkey and cornbread dressing. She narrated every task like she was hosting a cooking show, making sure everyone knew how much effort she was expending, how much she was sacrificing for family. Susan arrived at noon with her husband and 2 teenage daughters, all smiles and casserole dishes. Susan had been my mother's best friend since elementary school, witness to every version of Patricia's narrative. She hugged me warmly, exclaiming over how grown-up I looked, how successful I must be. "Your mother talks about you constantly," Susan said. "How proud she is, even though it breaks her heart that you're so far away. Texas. I can't even imagine. Don't you miss home?" The table was set with my mother's best china, the kind she never used for just family. This meal was theater, a performance for Susan and her family, proof that Patricia Martinez had done everything right. Her children were successful, her home was perfect, her sacrifices had paid off in ways that deserved admiration. We bowed our heads for grace. My mother's voice rang out, thanking God for family, for blessings, for the gift of having her children home where they belonged. I kept my eyes open, watching her perform gratitude while the folder of evidence sat upstairs in my suitcase like a ticking bomb. Dinner conversation flowed around topics that were safe, neutral, designed to showcase success without revealing struggle. Susan talked about her daughter's college prospects. Her husband discussed his promotion at the insurance company. My mother steered the conversation to my career, asking leading questions that let her display knowledge of my life while never quite letting me speak for myself. "Jennifer's doing so well at that agency in Austin," she said, refilling Susan's wine glass. "Though of course the cost of living in Texas is astronomical. I worry about her constantly, but she's independent. Takes after her father that way. Never asks for help even when she needs it." The implication hung in the air, carefully constructed. I was successful but struggling, independent but in need, accomplished but ultimately the source of my mother's worry and sacrifice. Everyone nodded sympathetically, admiring Patricia's grace in handling such a difficult daughter. I felt the ring on my finger, twisted it slightly, watched light catch in the diamond facets. Grandma Elena had worn this ring for 53 years. She'd survived the Depression, raised 3 children, buried a husband, and lived to see great-grandchildren. She'd been strong in ways my mother would never understand. Strength that didn't require making others smaller. After dinner, while my mother and Susan cleaned up with performances of martyred efficiency, I escaped to the back porch. The November air was cold enough to bite, but I needed it. Needed something real and sharp to cut through the haze of manipulation. Tyler found me there, hands shoved in his pockets, breath clouding in the chill. "She's planning something," he said quietly. "I heard her on the phone yesterday with Aunt Susan. Something about making sure you understand your responsibilities this weekend. I think she knows you're pulling back. She always knows." Friday would bring the outlet mall trip, another performance, another test. Saturday the country club luncheon, where my mother could parade me in front of her social circle. Each event designed to remind me of my place in her narrative, to reinforce the story she'd spent my lifetime constructing. But I had Tyler's folder. I had Vanessa's sister's contact information saved in my phone. And I had a diamond ring that represented love without conditions, inheritance without strings, family that didn't keep score. The next morning, I told my mother I needed to skip the mall trip. "Work emergency," I lied. "Crisis with a client that required immediate attention." Her reaction was immediate and nuclear. "After I flew across the country to spend time with you. After I planned this whole weekend. After everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made. This is how you repay me." The tantrum lasted an hour, cycling through tears, accusations, guilt, and finally cold silence. I wrote it out like I'd learned to ride out storms, knowing that engaging would only feed it, that the only winning move was not to play. But Saturday's luncheon was non-negotiable. She'd told too many people, made too many promises about her successful daughter's appearance. To skip it would be social humiliation, the kind of public failure Patricia Martinez couldn't tolerate. So I agreed. Wore a dress she approved of, styled my hair the way she preferred, put on the diamond ring because something in me knew it mattered. We drove to the Asheville Country Club in her car, and every mile felt like traveling toward a reckoning I couldn't yet name. The parking lot was full of luxury sedans and SUVs, the kind of casual wealth that my mother aspired to but could never quite achieve through her administrative assistant salary. Unless, of course, she supplemented it with money stolen from her children. We were halfway to the entrance, my mother's hand possessive on my elbow, when she saw the ring in full sunlight. Really saw it. The way it caught attention, the way it marked me as someone with inheritance, with family wealth that hadn't come from her. She stopped walking. Her grip tightened painfully on my arm. "Take it off," she hissed. "That ring should have been mine. Elena had no right to give it to you. Take it off right now." "No," I said simply. "It was left to me. It's mine." What happened next occurred so fast that my mind struggled to process the sequence. Her hand released my elbow. Drew back. Connected with my face in a slap that snapped my head sideways and sent my sunglasses flying. The sound echoed across the parking lot, sharp as a gunshot. "That's my inheritance," she snarled, her careful mask completely shattered. "Everything you have is because of me. That ring, your education, your career. All of it belongs to me. You're nothing without me. Nothing." I stood there, face stinging, tasting blood from a split lip. Around us, people had stopped, shocked witnesses to Patricia Martinez's public unraveling. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the phone in my jacket pocket, the one I'd set to record that morning out of instinct honed by years of not being believed. I was thinking about Tyler's folder, about the evidence of fraud, about 6 years of automatic transfers funding a lifestyle built on lies. I was thinking about Grandma Elena, who'd loved me without conditions, who'd left me a ring as a reminder that I came from strength. And I was thinking about the satellite cameras overhead in the country club parking lot, the security footage that was already capturing everything, the digital trail that would corroborate every word. My mother had finally made her fatal mistake. She'd shown everyone exactly who she was. And I was done being her victim. The silence in the parking lot felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. My mother stood frozen, her hands still raised, face contorted in an expression I'd seen 1,000 times in private but never in public. Around us, country club members stood scattered between their cars, shopping bags dangling forgotten, mouths open in shock. "Mrs. Martinez." A man's voice cut through the quiet. George Henderson, president of the country club board, approaching with his wife Carol. Both wore matching expressions of concern and disapproval. "Is everything all right here?" My mother's transformation was instantaneous. The rage melted into distress, her posture crumpling into victimhood with practiced precision. She pressed a hand to her chest, manufactured tears springing to her eyes. "Oh George, I'm so sorry you had to see that." She gestured vaguely at me. Jennifer and I were having a disagreement about her grandmother's jewelry. Family matters. You know how emotional these things can become. I just got overwhelmed. "She struck you," Carol Henderson said flatly, looking directly at me. "We all saw it. Are you okay, honey?" I touched my lip, fingers coming away with blood. The sting was sharp but clarifying, cutting through years of conditioning that told me to smooth things over, to protect my mother's image, to absorb the blow and pretend it hadn't happened. "No," I said clearly. "I'm not okay. And this isn't the first time." "Jennifer," my mother's voice turned sharp with warning. "Don't be dramatic. I barely touched you. You've always been so sensitive, making mountains out of molehills. Tell them it was an accident." The old programming kicked in, that deep instinct to comply, to de-escalate, to take responsibility for her actions. But I thought about Tyler's empty bank account, about the credit cards opened in his name, about $60,000 of my money funding her lies while she performed sacrifice. It wasn't an accident, I said. And I have it recorded. I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording I'd started that morning. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of audio capturing everything from the moment we left the car. Her demand that I remove the ring. Her claim that my inheritance belonged to her. The slap. Her admission that she felt entitled to everything I had because she'd raised me. George Henderson's face hardened. I think we should move this inside. His office, not the dining room. Patricia, Carol, would you both come with me please? And someone should call security to pull the parking lot footage. My mother's carefully constructed world began crumbling in real time. Her face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Shock that I'd actually recorded her. Rage that I'd dare use it. Fear of what it meant for her reputation in the social circle she'd spent decades cultivating. The country club was her kingdom, the place where she performed her most elaborate version of herself. Now the audience was seeing backstage. Inside Henderson's oak-paneled office, the full scope of the situation crystallized. He pulled up security footage on his computer, the parking lot cameras capturing everything in high definition. The slap played back in slow motion, undeniable and brutal. My mother's face twisted in rage, my head snapping back from the impact, sunglasses flying. Mrs. Martinez, Henderson said carefully, the club has strict policies about violence on the premises. I'm going to have to ask you to leave and consider your membership status under review. Violence. My mother's voice climbed toward hysteria. It was a family disagreement. You can't punish me for disciplining my own daughter. She was being disrespectful, flaunting jewelry that should rightfully be mine. She's 28 years old, Carol said quietly. That's not discipline. That's assault. I sat in a leather chair, holding ice wrapped in a cloth napkin against my swelling lip, watching my mother's performance reach its crescendo. She wept. She raged. She threatened legal action. She reminded Henderson of her years of membership, her volunteer work, her standing in the community. Every tool in her manipulation arsenal deployed with increasing desperation. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear. The witnesses too numerous. Her mask had shattered in public, and there was no performance convincing enough to glue it back together. Tyler appeared in the doorway 30 minutes into the chaos. Someone had called him, probably one of the club staff who knew he was my brother. His face went pale when he saw my split lip, the ice pack, the security footage still frozen on Henderson's screen. What did you do? He said to our mother, voice hollow. She turned on him immediately, redirecting her fury toward an easier target. This is your fault. You and your sister, conspiring against me. After everything I've done for both of you. This is how you repay me. With betrayal. Something in Tyler's expression shifted. I'd seen him afraid countless times, watched him navigate our mother's moods with the caution of someone crossing a minefield. But now he just looked tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of carrying weight that was never his to bear. I dropped out of college 2 years ago, he said to the room. Mom knows. She kept taking the tuition money Jen sent anyway. She's been draining both our bank accounts while telling everyone how hard she struggles. She opened credit cards in my name and maxed them out. I have proof. He pulled out his phone, showed Henderson the banking records, the credit report, the evidence he'd been quietly gathering. Our mother's face went from red to white, the performance abandoned in the face of exposure this complete. You went through my private papers, she hissed at Tyler. You had no right. You had no right to steal from us, he shot back, voice shaking but determined. No right to use us like ATMs while pretending to be some kind of martyr. I'm calling my lawyer, my mother announced, standing abruptly. This is harassment. You're both adults who made choices to help family. I won't be vilified for accepting support my children offered freely. That money was a gift. It wasn't a gift when you lied about what it was for, I said. It wasn't a gift when you forged signatures and opened accounts without permission. It wasn't a gift when you manipulated us with fake emergencies and manufactured crises. That's fraud, Mom. That's identity theft. That's financial abuse. The words hung in the air, sharper than any slap. My mother stared at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. In a way, I had. I was no longer the compliant daughter who absorbed her poison and called it love. Henderson cleared his throat. I think you folks need to handle this as a family, but Mrs. Martinez, you do need to leave the premises. We'll be in touch about your membership status. And miss, he looked at me, you might want to consider filing a police report about the assault. We'll provide the security footage if needed. We left separately. My mother stormed to her car, phone already pressed to her ear, probably calling Susan or her sister to spin the narrative before truth could spread. Tyler and I stood in the parking lot, shell-shocked by how quickly everything had exploded. What do we do now? He asked. I thought about the recording on my phone, the security footage, the financial records we'd both collected. I thought about Vanessa's sister, the family law attorney whose contact information sat in my phone. I thought about 6 years of automatic transfers, of guilt and obligation and love that was really just manipulation with a prettier name. We document everything, I said. And then we call a lawyer. That evening, back at the house while our mother locked herself in her bedroom making furious phone calls, Tyler and I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Bank statements. Credit reports. Email printouts. Copies of forged signatures. Every piece of evidence we could gather, organized into a narrative that was damning in its clarity. I called Vanessa first. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear Austin traffic in the background, the sounds of the life I'd built far away from this suffocating house. Jen, hey. What's up? You sound weird. I need your sister's number, I said. The attorney. Something happened and I need legal advice. Vanessa's voice sharpened with concern. Are you okay? What happened? I gave her the abbreviated version. The slap. The recording. The discovery of the full extent of our mother's fraud. By the time I finished, Vanessa was promising to text me her sister's contact information immediately and asking if I needed her to fly out. The care in her voice, the immediate offer of support without conditions or calculations, made my throat tight. Catherine Ross, Vanessa's sister, agreed to a video consultation that evening despite the holiday weekend. She was maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a manner that suggested she'd heard every version of family dysfunction imaginable. I need you to send me everything, she said after I'd laid out the situation. Every bank statement, every credit report, every recording, every piece of documentation you have. Texas and North Carolina have different laws regarding family financial abuse, but what you're describing crosses into criminal territory in both states. She's our mother, Tyler said quietly from beside me. Can we really prosecute our own mother? Catherine's expression softened slightly. That's a decision only you two can make. But I need you to understand something. What she did wasn't just unethical. It wasn't just hurtful. It was illegal. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, potentially elder abuse if she's done this to other family members. The law exists to protect people from exactly this kind of exploitation, even when it comes from family. What happens if we file charges? I asked. Catherine walked us through the process. Police reports. Investigation. Potential arrest. Court proceedings. The timeline could stretch months or years. It would be public. It would destroy what remained of family relationships. It would mark us permanently as the children who sent their mother to prison. Or, Catherine continued, you can pursue civil action. Sue for restitution of the stolen funds. Get restraining orders. Freeze her access to your financial information. It's less severe but still holds her accountable and protects you going forward. We sat with that information, Tyler and I, two siblings who'd survived the same house in different ways, now facing an impossible choice. Hold our mother accountable and face the social consequences, or let it go and spend the rest of our lives waiting for the next manipulation, the next crisis, the next demand that would come wrapped in guilt and obligation. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, sent to both Tyler and me. After everything I've done for you both, this is how you repay me. Fine. Don't expect me to be there when you need me. You're both dead to me. The threat that once would have sent me spiraling into panic now felt like relief. She'd finally said what I'd always suspected. Her love was conditional. Her support came with invisible interest rates. We were valuable as resources, not as human beings. I want to file charges, I said to Catherine. Criminal and civil. All of it. Tyler looked at me, fear and hope warring in his expression. Are you sure? I thought about the girl who'd hidden journals behind her dresser, who'd learned to track emotional weather patterns to survive. I thought about the woman I'd become in Austin, successful and skilled but still tethered to a past that drained her. I thought about Grandma Elena's ring on my finger, proof that family could mean something other than obligation and pain. I'm sure, I said. She did this to herself. We're just making sure there are consequences. Tyler nodded slowly. Okay. Then I'm with you. Whatever happens, I'm with you. Catherine Ross got to work immediately, despite the holiday weekend. By Sunday evening, we had restraining orders filed. By Monday morning, we'd submitted police reports in both Texas and North Carolina. By Tuesday, my mother's bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. She fought back with everything she had. Called relatives to paint us as vindictive children. Posted on social media about betrayal and abandonment. Hired a lawyer who sent threatening letters about defamation and emotional distress. Showed up at Tyler's workplace crying and begging him to drop the charges. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial forensics experts traced the money, documented the fraud, confirmed the identity theft. The security footage from the country club played on local news after someone leaked it, turning my mother into a cautionary tale about family abuse hiding behind respectable facades. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Patricia Martinez was arrested at her home on Magnolia Street. The charges included identity theft, fraud, forgery, and assault. The bail was set at $50,000, an amount she couldn't pay without access to the accounts that had been frozen. She called me from jail. I let it go to voicemail. Listened later to her voice oscillating between rage and pleading, threats and promises, everything she'd always done but compressed into 2 minutes of desperate manipulation. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Tyler, who'd moved into a friend's apartment to get away from the house, away from the memories, away from the woman who'd systematically exploited his trust and his bank account. How are you holding up? I asked. Honestly, he said, and I could hear traffic sounds behind him, the noise of a world he was finally free to move through without calculation. I feel lighter than I have in years. Is that wrong? Should I feel guilty? No, I said. You should feel free. That's what we're supposed to feel. My mother's trial wouldn't happen for months, maybe longer. The legal system moved slowly, grinding through evidence and procedure with bureaucratic patience. But Catherine Ross was optimistic about the outcome. The case was too clear, the documentation too thorough, the evidence too damning. I flew back to Austin 4 days after the arrest, leaving Tyler with resources and support systems and the promise that he wasn't alone. The flight felt different this time. Not escape, but return. Going back to the life I'd built, no longer haunted by Sunday phone calls or automatic transfers or the constant low-grade anxiety of wondering when the next crisis would hit. Vanessa picked me up at the airport, took one look at my healing lip and fading bruise, and pulled me into a hug that lasted a full minute. You did it, she said. You actually did it. I'm so proud of you. At work, I threw myself into a rebranding project for a major client, channeling everything I'd learned about toxic narratives and manufactured images into strategy that exposed truth rather than obscuring it. Marcus noticed the shift in my work, the new edge to my creative thinking. Whatever happened over Thanksgiving, he said during a review meeting, it's translated into your best work yet. You're seeing through surface narratives to core truths. That's invaluable. I didn't tell him the full story. Didn't explain that I'd learned to see through narratives by surviving one for 28 years. But I understood what he meant. Pain, when processed rather than buried, could become insight. survival skills could transform into professional expertise. The ring stayed on my finger, a daily reminder of what love could look like when it wasn't transactional. Grandma Elena had given it freely, without conditions or expectations, as a symbol of affection that didn't require repayment. Every time I caught it glinting in the light, I thought about the difference between gifts and obligations, between family and captivity. My mother's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. Probation instead of jail time. Restitution payments instead of criminal conviction. Catherine Ross called to discuss the options, laying out the choice in clear terms. The prosecutor is willing to consider it, she said. But it's your decision. Do you want justice or do you want peace? I thought about that question for a long time. Justice meant my mother facing consequences, public acknowledgement of what she'd done. Peace meant accepting less punishment in exchange for closure, for the certainty that it was over. What does Tyler want? I asked. Tyler wants to move on with his life. He's worried about her going to prison. He's also terrified of her getting out and starting the cycle again. In the end, we chose consequences. Not out of vindictiveness, but out of necessity. People like my mother didn't change because you asked nicely. They changed when the cost of staying the same became unbearable. If there was any chance of her understanding what she'd done, any possibility of genuine remorse instead of performed victimhood, it would only come through facing real accountability. The trial date was set for the following spring. I had months to prepare, months to process, months to build a life that wasn't defined by what I was escaping from but by what I was moving toward. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, Sunday at 6 o'clock was just another hour. No phone call. No anxiety. No automatic transfer depleting my account. Just silence. And in that silence, finally, the sound of my own breathing. Free. Winter in Austin arrived with the kind of mild temperatures that made my North Carolina friends jealous. While Asheville dealt with ice storms and frozen pipes, I walked to work in a light jacket, coffee in hand, breathing air that didn't carry the weight of obligation. The months following my mother's arrest brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Tyler enrolled in actual classes at Austin Community College, moving to Texas with money he'd saved once his accounts were finally his own. We found him a studio apartment in South Austin, helped him register for spring semester courses in automotive technology. Watching him choose his own path, free from our mother's narrative about what he should become, felt like witnessing someone learn to walk after years of being told they were paralyzed. At Momentum Creative, my work took on new dimensions. I'd been assigned to rebrand a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for young adults, many from difficult family situations. The research phase involved interviews with people who'd experienced economic abuse, patterns I recognized with uncomfortable clarity. Their stories echoed mine. Parents who took out loans in their children's names. Families who guilt successful kids into funding lifestyles they couldn't afford. The manipulation wrapped in love, the exploitation disguised as need. Marcus called me into his office on a February afternoon, late winter sun slanting through the windows. The nonprofit work is exceptional, he said, pulling up my presentation boards on his monitor. But I'm noticing something else. You're not just designing a brand. You're building an education system. These materials go beyond marketing into actual curriculum. I shifted in my chair, uncertain if I'd overstepped. The client asked for a rebrand. I gave them tools to help people recognize financial abuse patterns, to understand legal resources, to document exploitation. Maybe I got too involved. Marcus shook his head. You got exactly involved enough. This is the kind of work that changes lives. Have you thought about consulting independently? Specializing in organizations that serve abuse survivors? The idea landed like a seed in fertile ground. I'd been so focused on surviving, on escaping, on holding my mother accountable that I hadn't considered what came after. What purpose could be built from pain? How expertise earned through trauma could serve others still trapped? I'd need to think about it, I said. But yeah. Maybe. Catherine Ross called that evening with trial updates. My mother had rejected another plea deal, insisting on her innocence despite evidence that filled multiple banker boxes. Her lawyer was building a defense around mental illness and empty nest syndrome, painting her as a victim of her own maternal devotion taken to unhealthy extremes. She's going to claim she didn't understand what she was doing was wrong, Catherine explained. That her actions came from a place of genuine need and confusion, not malice. It's a desperate strategy, but juries can be sympathetic to mothers. What are our chances? I asked, watching Tyler through my apartment window as he worked on his truck in the parking lot, finally able to afford the parts he needed. Honestly, very good. The documentation is too thorough. The pattern too clear. The recording from the parking lot establishes her awareness and intent. But Jen, I need to prepare you. Even if we win, even if she's convicted, you're going to face backlash. People don't like children who prosecute their parents. The cultural narrative is powerful. I'd already experienced previews of that backlash. Distant relatives who'd crawled out of silence to send messages about forgiveness and family loyalty. Former neighbors who remembered Patricia as a devoted single mother, who couldn't reconcile that image with the woman now facing felony charges. Comments on news articles calling me vindictive, ungrateful, cold. The word they used most was unnatural, as if protecting myself from exploitation violated some fundamental law of biology. But I'd also received other messages. From people who'd survived similar situations. From adult children still trapped in toxic family systems. From professionals who worked with abuse survivors. They thanked me for speaking up, for showing that accountability was possible, for proving that family ties didn't override personal rights. One email came from a woman named Diane Shen in Portland, Oregon. She ran a consulting firm called Reclaim Strategy that helped abuse survivors rebuild their financial lives and identities. Her story paralleled mine with eerie precision. A mother who'd stolen her identity. Years of exploitation disguised as family support. Legal action that led to criminal conviction. I spent 5 years feeling guilty, she wrote. Like I'd destroyed my family by refusing to keep funding my own abuse. Then I realized I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending the destruction wasn't already there. If you ever want to talk, or if you're interested in this kind of work, reach out. We need more people who understand from the inside. I saved that email, returned to it often during the months leading to trial. The idea that my experience could have value beyond personal survival, that the skills I developed through necessity could serve a larger purpose, shifted something fundamental in how I understood what had happened. It wasn't just trauma to overcome. It was knowledge to apply. March brought jury selection. Catherine flew to North Carolina for the proceedings, keeping me updated through daily calls. The trial itself was scheduled for 2 weeks, though she warned it might stretch longer depending on witnesses and defense strategy. You don't have to attend, she reminded me. You'll be called to testify, but you can fly in just for that. Watching the whole trial might be re-traumatizing. But I needed to be there. Needed to see it through. Tyler felt the same. We booked a hotel in Asheville, far enough from Magnolia Street to avoid accidental encounters with my mother's supporters, close enough to the courthouse that we could walk each morning. The trial opened on a Monday morning in late March. The courthouse was old brick and white columns, the kind of Southern architecture designed to evoke dignity and justice. Inside, it smelled of floor polish and nervous sweat. The gallery filled with a mix of curious locals, family members on both sides, and a few journalists covering what had become a regional story about family dysfunction behind closed doors. My mother entered wearing a conservative navy suit, her hair styled simply, makeup minimal. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by circumstances and the orange glow she'd carried from months of restricted freedom. Our eyes met across the courtroom. Hers held rage and betrayal. Mine held nothing. I'd spent the winter emptying myself of expectations, of hope for remorse or understanding. She was a stranger wearing my mother's face. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Bank records showing the automatic transfers from my account. Credit reports proving the fraudulent accounts opened in Tyler's name. Forged signatures on loan applications. Email chains where my mother invented emergencies and crises, each proven false through subsequent investigation. The narrative was damning in its clarity. Tyler testified on day 3. He sat in the witness box looking young and terrified, hands gripping the armrests as the prosecutor walked him through his bank statements, his credit report, the moment he discovered his college fund had been drained years ago. "Did you give your mother permission to open credit cards in your name?" the prosecutor asked. "No, ma'am. I didn't even know they existed until I checked my credit report last November." "Did she ever explain where the tuition money was going when you weren't enrolled in classes?" "She said it was going into savings for when I went back. But I checked. There was no savings account. The money just disappeared." My mother's lawyer, a man named Richard Foster who specialized in defending white-collar crimes, tried to paint Tyler as a confused young man who'd given his mother access to his accounts willingly, who'd simply forgotten the permissions he'd granted. But Tyler held firm, answering each question with quiet certainty. He'd been documenting for months. He knew what he knew. I testified on day 5. Catherine had prepared me extensively, running through likely questions and defense strategies. But nothing quite prepared me for sitting 15 feet from my mother while recounting years of manipulation and exploitation to a room full of strangers. The prosecutor walked me through my employment history, my income progression, the automatic transfers I'd set up believing they were helping with genuine hardships. We reviewed the Christmas visit when I discovered the BMW and the renovated kitchen. The recording from the parking lot played for the jury, my mother's voice clear and damning. "That's my inheritance. Everything you have is because of me." Foster's cross-examination focused on painting me as a willing participant who'd later regretted her generosity. He emphasized that I'd never questioned the transfers, never asked for documentation, never expressed doubt until years into the arrangement. "Isn't it true that you sent this money willingly?" he asked. "That your mother never forced you to make these transfers?" "She didn't force me with a weapon," I said carefully. "She used guilt, manufactured crises, and emotional manipulation. When someone teaches you from childhood that your value is measured by your usefulness, when they make you believe that questioning them is betrayal, coercion doesn't require force. But you're an educated adult. Surely you understood you could stop sending money at any time." I looked at the jury, seeing faces that ranged from sympathetic to skeptical. Understanding this required understanding how abuse worked, how it didn't announce itself with bruises or broken bones but with eroded boundaries and normalized exploitation. "In theory, yes," I said. "In reality, I was trapped by patterns established over decades. She'd trained me to believe that my independence was selfishness, my success was her sacrifice, my money was our money. Breaking free required first recognizing I was trapped." The defense called character witnesses. Church friends who described Patricia as devoted and generous. Neighbors who remembered her as a single mother working hard to provide. Susan, my mother's best friend, testified tearfully about Patricia's struggles and sacrifices, painting a picture of a woman overwhelmed by financial pressure who'd made mistakes but never acted with malice. Then the defense called my mother. She took the stand wearing an expression of wounded dignity, voice trembling as she recounted her version of events. The difficulty of raising 2 children alone. The fear of asking for help. The relief when I'd started sending money voluntarily. The confusion when Tyler accused her of wrongdoing when she'd only been trying to manage household expenses. "I never meant to hurt them," she said, tears tracking through carefully applied makeup. "I thought I was teaching them about family responsibility, about taking care of each other. Maybe I made mistakes with the paperwork, maybe I got confused about which account was which. But everything I did was out of love. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Vulnerable but dignified. Remorseful without admitting guilt. Confused but well-meaning." I watched jurors' faces soften, saw sympathy replacing skepticism. Catherine's cross-examination cut through the performance with surgical precision. She walked my mother through specific transactions, asking her to explain the cruise charged to Tyler's credit card when she claimed to be struggling with basic bills. The designer purses purchased the same week she'd called me crying about choosing between medication and groceries. The country club membership that cost more annually than the household repairs she constantly needed money for. My mother faltered, contradicted herself, grew defensive. The careful victim narrative cracked under the weight of specific numbers and dates. By the time Catherine finished, the jury's sympathy had cooled back into skepticism. Closing arguments came on day 12. The prosecution painted a clear picture of systematic exploitation, of a mother who'd weaponized her children's love and sense of duty to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The defense argued for understanding and mercy, for seeing my mother's actions as mistakes born of genuine need rather than calculated fraud. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Tyler and I waited in a conference room down the hall, drinking bad coffee and not talking, both of us too wrung out for conversation. When the bailiff finally called us back, my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. The jury foreman was a woman in her 60s, a retired teacher with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She read the verdict in a steady voice that carried through the silent courtroom. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. Her lawyer gripped her arm as she swayed. I sat perfectly still, feeling Tyler's hand find mine, both of us anchored to each other as the room tilted and righted. Sentencing was scheduled for 4 weeks later. We flew back to Austin the next day, exhausted but strangely lighter. The validation of the verdict, the public acknowledgement that what we'd experienced was real and criminal, not just family drama or personal sensitivity, carried weight I hadn't anticipated. But the work wasn't finished. Criminal conviction was one thing. Restitution was another. Catherine immediately began civil proceedings to recover the stolen funds and damages, a process that would take months more of paperwork and court dates. In the meantime, I had decisions to make about my own future. Marcus's suggestion about independent consulting kept circling back. Diane Chen's email waited in my saved folder. And increasingly, I found myself thinking about all the people still trapped in situations like the one I'd escaped, still believing that family obligation meant accepting abuse, still unaware that what they were experiencing had a name and legal remedies. I called Diane on a Thursday evening, standing on my apartment balcony watching Austin's skyline light up against the dusk. I read about your trial, she said after we'd exchanged introductions. Congratulations on the conviction. How are you holding up? Honestly, I don't know. Lighter, maybe. But also uncertain about what comes next. That's normal. You've been in survival mode for years. Now you have space to actually choose instead of just react. It's disorienting. We talked for an hour. About her journey from victim to advocate. About the consulting firm she'd built helping survivors navigate financial recovery. About the need for people who understood these dynamics from the inside, who could recognize the patterns and help others document and escape. I have more work than I can handle, she said. And most of it is in Texas. Austin, Dallas, Houston. The market is there. The need is desperate. If you're interested, I'd love to have someone with your background and skills as a partner. The opportunity hung there, glittering with possibility and risk. Leaving Momentum Creative, where I'd built my career and found stability. Starting something new, more personal, more raw. Using my trauma as curriculum instead of burying it as past. Can I think about it? I asked. Take all the time you need. But Jen, I'll say this. The work is hard. You'll hear stories that trigger your own trauma. You'll face clients who aren't ready to leave, who make choices that frustrate you. But it's also the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Helping someone else break free, watching them reclaim their life, knowing you played a part in that. There's nothing else like it. That night I made lists, the way I'd always processed decisions. Pros and cons, risks and opportunities. Safe paths and uncertain ones. Tyler wandered in around 10, dropping his backpack by the door, grabbing a soda from the fridge. Still up, he observed. Let me guess. Overthinking something. Maybe. I showed him the lists, explained Diane's offer. He studied them for a long moment, then looked at me with an expression older than his 24 years. You saved my life, Jen. Not just from Mom, but from thinking that was normal. That I deserved that. You showed me what fighting back looked like. If you can do that for other people, why wouldn't you? Sentencing day arrived with spring flowers blooming across Asheville. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters, split between those supporting family privacy and those advocating for abuse victims' rights. We walked through them with Catherine, ignoring cameras, and shouted questions. Judge Margaret Chin, no relation to Diane or Vanessa, presided with stern efficiency. She'd reviewed all the evidence, read impact statements from both Tyler and me, and heard from my mother's supporters who pleaded for leniency. Mrs. Martinez, the judge said, looking directly at my mother, you systematically exploited your children's love and sense of obligation for personal gain. You manufactured crises, forged documents, and committed fraud across state lines. When confronted, you responded with violence and continued manipulation. I see no evidence of genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. My mother started to speak. Her lawyer silenced her with a hand on her arm. The court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, Judge Chin continued, with credit for time served. Upon release, you will serve 3 years supervised probation and pay full restitution to both victims, totaling $137,000 plus interest and damages. You are permanently barred from accessing any financial accounts or information belonging to Jennifer or Tyler Martinez. 7 years. I'd expected less, hoped for more, landed somewhere in between. My mother crumpled, sobbing into her lawyer's shoulder. I felt Tyler's hand find mine again, both of us silent witnesses to consequences finally catching up with actions. We didn't stay for the aftermath. Walked out through different doors than we'd entered, avoiding the press and the protesters and the family members who'd chosen sides. Found a quiet diner on the edge of town, ordered food neither of us tasted, and sat in the booth processing the finality of it all. It's really over, Tyler said. This part is. The appeals will take years. The restitution might never fully materialize. But yeah. The main event is over. Do you feel different? Like, does it change anything? I considered that. Did I feel victorious? Relieved? Sad? All of those things and none of them. Mostly I felt tired and ready to start building something instead of just defending against destruction. I feel free to choose what comes next, I said. For the first time in my life, I get to decide what my life looks like without her voice in my head. So what are you going to choose? I pulled out my phone, opened the email from Diane Chen, typed a response I'd been composing for weeks. The message was simple. Yes. Let's do this. When can we start? Tyler grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. You're going to be amazing at it. We flew back to Austin that evening. I had 2 weeks to give notice at Momentum Creative, to prepare for a transition that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Marcus took the news with understanding, offering references and connections and genuine support. You've been moving toward this for months, he said. I saw it in your work. You're meant to do something that matters on a deeper level. Go do it. Diane and I officially launched our partnership in June. Reclaim strategy expanded to include Texas operations, with me leading client services while she handled business development. Our first client was a young man whose father had drained his settlement money from a car accident. Our second was a woman in her 40s still sending money to parents who gambled it away. Our third was a teenager trying to escape a family that treated her part-time job income as household property. Each story was different. Each story was the same. The details varied but the core remained consistent. Family members who'd crossed lines they didn't acknowledge existed. Victims who'd been taught that recognizing abuse was the real betrayal. Systems that made it easier to stay trapped than to fight free. The work was exactly as hard and meaningful as Diane had promised. Some days I came home drained, triggered by stories too close to my own. Other days I watched clients realize they had options, saw them stand up to exploitation, helped them document and prepare and finally break free. Those days made everything worthwhile. Tyler thrived in his automotive program, discovering a genuine talent for diagnostic work. He started dating someone from his class, a kind woman who didn't need detailed explanations about why family was complicated. On Sundays at 6 o'clock, he'd text me memes or funny stories, reclaiming that time slot with something light instead of laden. My mother's appeals were denied systematically. She served her time in a minimum security federal facility, writing letters that Catherine Ross advised us not to read. We didn't. Whatever she had to say, whatever version of events she was still performing, we no longer needed to hear it. Grandma Elena's ring stayed on my finger, a constant reminder. I'd gotten it appraised once, discovered it was worth significantly more than I'd imagined. But I'd never sell it. The value wasn't in the diamond or the setting. It was in what it represented. Love without conditions. Family without cost. Inheritance that was gift, not burden. And sometimes, catching light from my hand as I worked with a new client, as I helped them see patterns they'd been taught to ignore, I thought about the parking lot at the country club. The moment when my mother's mask finally shattered. The slap that hurt but also freed. She'd meant it as punishment. As a reminder of her power, her ownership, her right to everything I had. Instead, she'd given me the final piece of evidence I needed. The push that transformed survival into action. Some prisons don't have bars. Some are built from guilt and obligation and the fiction that family means accepting harm. Breaking free required seeing the walls. Required naming them. Required choosing yourself even when that choice looked selfish to everyone who'd never been trapped. I'd made that choice. Tyler had made that choice. And now I spent my days helping others see that they could choose too. The girl who'd learned to read emotional weather, who'd survived by making herself small, who'd sent money to stop the guilt from crushing her, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood power, who documented everything, who helped others reclaim what had been stolen. That transformation had cost everything. It had been worth every penny. 5 years after the trial, I stood in a conference room in Portland, Oregon, looking out at the Columbia River while 23 people filled chairs behind me. 23 survivors of family financial abuse, gathered for the first annual Reclaim Strategy Summit. Some had been our clients. Others had reached out after reading articles or seeing media coverage. All of them carried stories that echoed in frequency I recognized, even when the details differed. Diane opened the conference with her usual blend of warmth and directness. She'd become more than a business partner over the years. She was the mentor I'd needed, the friend who understood without explanation, the person who'd walked this path ahead of me and left markers so I wouldn't get lost. The summit was Tyler's idea, actually. He'd graduated from his automotive program and now managed a repair shop in South Austin, but he stayed involved with Reclaim Strategy as an advisor and occasional speaker. Young men, he'd pointed out, rarely saw themselves represented in conversations about family financial abuse. The narrative centered mothers and daughters, leaving sons invisible in their own exploitation. So we designed the summit to be inclusive, intersectional, acknowledging that this particular form of harm crossed every demographic boundary. The attendees ranged from college students to retirees, from tech workers to teachers, from Texas to Maine. What united them wasn't demographics but experience. They'd all learned that family could be a weapon, that love could come with invoices, that escape required documentation and courage most people never had to summon. I was scheduled to speak after lunch, sharing my story publicly for the first time in detail. I'd done interviews, written articles, consulted on policy, but I'd never stood in front of people and walked through the full arc from exploitation to freedom. The vulnerability felt enormous, but Diane had convinced me it mattered. People need to see the whole journey, she'd said. Not just the victory, but the mess. The guilt. The times you almost gave up. That's what gives others permission to struggle, too. When my turn came, I stood at the podium wearing a simple black dress and Grandma Elena's ring. The room quieted. I took a breath and began not with the parking lot slap, though that would come, but with childhood. With learning to read emotional weather. With understanding too young that my value was measured by my usefulness. I walked them through college and the first transfers. Through the escalation that felt so gradual I barely noticed until I was sending nearly a third of my income to people who were lying about why they needed it. Through the Christmas revelation and the months of gathering evidence. Through the decision to prosecute, which had felt impossible until it became the only option that allowed me to keep breathing. When I played the recording from the parking lot, several people gasped. "That's my inheritance." My mother's voice filled the room, raw with entitlement. "Everything you have is because of me." I watched faces in the audience shift through recognition, pain, validation. They'd heard versions of those words in their own lives. The hardest part to talk about was the aftermath. The conviction had felt like victory, but the years following brought complications I hadn't anticipated. Relatives who'd sided with my mother and cut me off completely. Community members who viewed me as the ungrateful daughter who'd destroyed her family. Moments of doubt, usually at 3 a.m, when I'd wonder if I'd done the right thing or just the legal thing. But then I talked about Tyler, about watching him build a life free from manipulation. About the first client who'd successfully prosecuted their abuser and called to thank me, voice shaking with relief and vindication. About learning that healing wasn't linear, that some days I still struggled with guilt programming that ran bone deep, but I'd built a life that made the struggle worthwhile. My mother was released on good behavior after 5 years. I knew because Catherine had called to inform me, as required by victim notification laws. Patricia Martinez walked out of federal prison into a halfway house in Charlotte, her life reduced to the dimensions of a single room and supervised employment at a call center. The restitution payments came monthly, small amounts garnished from minimum wage, a trickle that would take decades to fulfill the court-ordered total. She'd tried to contact me twice. Once through a letter that Catherine intercepted and I chose not to read. Once through a Facebook message from an account that claimed to be an old family friend but used phrasing and manipulation tactics I recognized instantly. I blocked it without responding. Some people asked if I'd ever forgive her. If time and distance had softened my anger. The question always felt like it missed the point. Forgiveness implied she'd acknowledged wrongdoing and sought amends. My mother had done neither. Her version of events, from what I'd heard through relatives who still maintained contact, centered her as the victim of ungrateful children and an unjust system. So no, I didn't forgive her. But I'd released her. Released the hope that she'd ever understand or apologize. Released the fantasy of the mother I'd needed her to be. Released the obligation to carry her choices as my burden. That release felt more valuable than forgiveness ever could. After my presentation, during the question period, a woman in her 30s raised her hand. Her voice shook as she spoke. "How did you know when it was time to stop trying to fix the relationship and start protecting yourself instead?" I thought about that question, about the complexity beneath its simple words. When had I known? Had it been the Christmas visit when I'd seen the BMW? The parking lot slap? Tyler's credit report? Or had it been a slower accumulation, like water wearing down stone, until one day I looked up and the landscape had completely changed? "I don't think there was one moment," I said. It was more like gradually learning a new language. For years, I'd been translating her behavior into the most generous possible interpretation because that's what survival required. But eventually, I learned to translate it accurately. To call manipulation manipulation. To call theft theft. To call abuse abuse. Once I could name what was happening, I couldn't unname it. The summit continued through the weekend. Workshops on documentation strategies, legal resources, therapeutic approaches to recovering from family financial abuse. Diane led a session on rebuilding credit. Tyler talked about the specific challenges young men faced in recognizing and reporting exploitation by mothers. A therapist named Marcus Chen, whose work focused on complex family trauma, discussed the neurobiology of obligation and guilt. On the final evening, we held a symbolic ceremony. Participants were invited to write down the lies they'd been told, the beliefs that had kept them trapped, and burn them in a fire pit outside the venue. I watched papers curl and blacken, smoke carrying words like ungrateful, selfish, owe them everything, family first, up into the Portland night. I'd written my own contribution earlier. Just 3 words. Your happiness matters. Simple words, but ones I'd spent 28 years not believing. Watching them catch flame felt like releasing something I'd carried so long I'd stopped noticing its weight. Reclaim strategy had grown beyond what Diane and I initially imagined. We now had offices in Portland, Austin, and Chicago. A staff of 12, including lawyers, therapists, financial advisors, and investigators. We'd consulted on legislation in 4 states, helped draft policy for victim services organizations, trained law enforcement on recognizing family financial abuse patterns. But the real measure of success came in individual stories. The young woman who'd successfully sued her parents for the college fund they'd stolen. The man who'd gotten his credit cleaned after his mother's identity theft. The teenager who'd emancipated from a family that treated her as an income source. Each case was a battle. Each victory mattered. My own life had settled into something resembling peace. I'd moved to Portland 2 years after the trial, drawn by the city's culture and proximity to Diane's headquarters. I'd bought a small house in the Alberta Arts District, with a garden where I grew vegetables that actually tasted like something. Turns out plants thrived when you gave them what they needed without conditions attached. I'd started dating someone, a thoughtful architect named David who'd asked about my family exactly once, heard the abbreviated version, and simply nodded. Okay. Let me know if you want to talk about it more, or if you don't. Both are fine. The ease of that response, the lack of pressure to perform either trauma or healing, felt like another kind of freedom. Tyler visited often, usually bringing his girlfriend Maya, who'd become something like the sister I'd never had. They were talking about marriage, about starting a family far away from the patterns we'd grown up in. Watching Tyler build something healthy from scratch, without template or guide, filled me with hope I hadn't known I still had capacity for. On a Thursday evening in late October, I got a call from Catherine Ross. She'd become a friend beyond her role as my attorney, someone I checked in with occasionally even when there was no legal business to discuss. Your mother's probation officer contacted me, Catherine said. Apparently Patricia has been asking about you. Wants to know if you'd be willing to meet for a supervised conversation as part of her rehabilitation program. The request didn't surprise me. People like my mother never truly changed, but they learned to perform change when it served their interests. A reconciliation scene would play well for parole boards and probation reviews, proof she'd done the work and made amends. What did you tell them? I asked. That I'd pass along the message but the decision was entirely yours. Jen, you don't owe her anything. Not a meeting, not a conversation, not even an explanation for refusing. I know. I looked out my kitchen window at my garden, at the pumpkins I'd grown from seed, heavy and orange and mine. Tell them no. Tell them I'm not interested in supervised conversations or reconciliation attempts. Tell them I've moved on and I'd like to be left alone. After I hung up, I sat with my decision. Some people might see it as unforgiving, cold, a daughter unwilling to give her mother a second chance. But those people hadn't lived through what I had. Hadn't sent $60,000 to manufactured crises. Hadn't discovered credit cards opened in their sibling's name. Hadn't been slapped in a parking lot for wearing inherited jewelry. Second chances were for people who acknowledged their first chance had been wasted. My mother had shown, consistently and completely, that she believed she'd done nothing wrong. Meeting with her would only give her another opportunity to perform victimhood and attempt manipulation. I'd spent too many years giving her opportunities. I was done. The following week, I received an envelope forwarded through Catherine's office. Inside was a letter from my mother, written in her careful cursive online notebook paper. I held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of words I hadn't read yet, then walked to my fireplace and set it ablaze without opening it. Whatever she had to say, I didn't need to hear it. Her version of events, her justifications, her attempts to rewrite history, they no longer held power over me. But I did write my own letter that evening, though I had no intention of sending it. Sometimes the value was in the writing itself, in articulating what needed to be said even if no one else would read it. I wrote about the girl I'd been, perpetually afraid, calculating every word and gesture, believing her value lay only in her usefulness. I wrote about the woman I'd become, someone who understood that self-protection wasn't selfishness, that boundaries weren't betrayal, that choosing yourself could be the most moral choice available. I wrote about Tyler, about the clients I'd helped, about building something meaningful from the wreckage of what had been. And I wrote this. You taught me that family could be a trap. I learned that family could also be choice. You taught me that love came with conditions and invoices. I learned that real love asked nothing but presence. You taught me to make myself small so you could feel big. I learned to take up the space my life required. In trying to control me forever, you gave me every skill I needed to break free. Thank you for that, at least. I burned that letter too, watching my words join my mother's unread ones in smoke and ash. Then I called Tyler, called Diane, called David. Made plans for the weekend. Ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street. Lived my ordinary life that had been hard-won and remained daily practice. The work at Reclaim Strategy continued. We were approached by a documentary filmmaker interested in telling stories of family financial abuse. By a university researcher studying the long-term psychological impacts of parental exploitation. By legislators crafting bills to strengthen protections and streamline prosecution. Each opportunity expanded our reach, brought the issue further into public consciousness. But the most meaningful work remained individual. The consultations with people just beginning to name their experience. The moments when clients realized they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't ungrateful for wanting basic human dignity. Watching someone transform from victim to survivor to advocate, the same arc I'd traveled, never got old. On the 5th anniversary of my mother's conviction, I did something I'd been avoiding. I wrote an article for a major publication, titled The Cost of Family. It went beyond my personal story to examine the systemic issues that allowed family financial abuse to flourish. The cultural narratives about filial obligation. The legal gaps that made prosecution difficult. The therapeutic approaches needed to address complex family trauma. The piece went viral in a way I hadn't anticipated. Within a week, I'd received 3,000 emails from people sharing their own stories. From adult children still trapped in exploitative family dynamics. From financial advisors who'd seen clients drained by relatives. From therapists recognizing patterns they hadn't had language for. From lawyers interested in taking on cases they'd previously seen as merely family disputes. The response was overwhelming and clarifying. This wasn't just my story or even the stories of Reclaim Strategy's clients. This was a widespread form of harm hiding in plain sight, normalized by culture and ignored by systems. We were scratching the surface of something vast and urgent. Diane and I spent the next 6 months building infrastructure to meet the demand. Training programs for therapists and legal professionals. Educational materials for young adults aging out of toxic family systems. Partnerships with universities studying economic abuse. A hotline offering initial consultation and resource referral. The work expanded faster than we could have imagined, funded by grants and private donations and speaking fees from people who wanted to help. 7 years after the parking lot incident, on a crisp autumn morning that reminded me of that Thanksgiving when everything changed, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small box and a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Ms. Martinez, I attended your summit 3 years ago. Your story gave me permission to recognize my own situation and take action. Last week, the judge ruled in my favor. Full restitution and a protective order. I wanted you to have this as a small thank you. It's not much, but it meant something to me, and I hope it means something to you. Inside the box was a simple silver bracelet engraved with 3 words. You were right. I clasped it on my wrist, feeling the cool metal against my skin. Added it to the symbols I carried. Grandma Elena's ring for inheritance without conditions. This bracelet for validation that the pain was real and the fight was worth it. That evening, I sat in my garden as the light faded, surrounded by the last vegetables of the season. My phone buzzed with messages from Tyler about his wedding plans, from Diane about a new client case, from David about dinner tomorrow. Ordinary messages from people who comprised my chosen family, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on presence rather than performance. I thought about the girl who'd tracked footsteps through her childhood home, who'd learned to make herself small, who'd believed that love required self-erasure. She'd survived by becoming hypervigilant, by reading patterns, by documenting everything. Those survival skills had transformed into professional expertise, personal strength, the foundation of a life that mattered. My mother was somewhere in Charlotte, living whatever constrained existence remained after consequences caught up with choices. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her anything. She'd become irrelevant to my story except as the antagonist who'd inadvertently taught me everything I needed to know about resilience. The work would continue. More clients would reach out. More cases would be fought. More people would break free from family systems that had treated them as resources rather than humans. Reclaim strategy would grow and evolve, meeting needs we hadn't yet imagined. But tonight, in this moment, I simply sat with my own freedom. The ability to choose how I spent my evening, who I let into my life, what boundaries I maintained without guilt or explanation. The peace of living authentically instead of strategically, of building instead of just defending. Grandma Elena's ring caught the last light of day. I twisted it gently, thinking about inheritance and what we passed down. My mother had tried to pass down patterns of exploitation, guilt, obligation without reciprocity. Instead, she'd given me something else entirely. The knowledge that cycles could be broken. That documentation was power. That choosing yourself wasn't selfish when the alternative was choosing your own destruction. And perhaps most importantly, that the opposite of family loyalty wasn't betrayal. It was liberation. I'd worn the diamond to lunch that Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago because some part of me had known a reckoning was coming. The ring had been armor and evidence, symbol and catalyst. It had marked me as someone with resources worth controlling, which had triggered my mother's final, fatal miscalculation. Now it marked me as someone who'd survived. Who'd transformed survival into purpose. Who'd built a life that the girl hiding journals behind her dresser could barely have imagined. The stars emerged over Portland, same stars that shone over Asheville, over Austin, over every place I'd been and everywhere I'd go. Constant and distant and beautiful in their indifference. They'd witnessed everything. The exploitation and the escape. The trial and the triumph. The long, difficult work of building peace from the rubble of what had been. And they'd be there tomorrow, when the work continued. When another client called seeking help. When another survivor found the courage to name their experience. When another person learned that family was supposed to feel like safety, not survival. My name is Jennifer Martinez. I wore my diamond to lunch, and my mother slapped me in a parking lot. Then I did what I'd been trained for my entire life, though she never intended this particular application. I documented everything. I recognized the pattern. I protected myself. And in doing so, I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be destroyed by it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.